The history of art has often been told as a story of male genius, where figures like Dalí or Picasso are revered for their ability to immerse themselves in their work, which allows us, the viewers, to reap the rewards by seeing the complexities of the human condition in bold, transformative strokes. But what if we, equipped with the depths of knowledge at our fingertips, look back and shift the focus from the masters who've long been the household names to the art itself? Today we will be looking at headlining masters and their lesser-known female counterparts, who despite their many societal and familial constraints, created works of equal artistry and insight, often addressing themes of the female experience, of identity, and power. Expanding our view to include these artists does not diminish the achievements of the greats, but rather adds more nuance to the conversation. Their works, long marginalized in the grand narrative of art history, offer perspectives that complement and complicate the canon, reminding us that there's still more beauty and drama to be explored in the story of art. The human figure in motion, captured at moments of grace or fatigue, vulnerability or strength, is a subject that has occupied artists across generations. Edgar Degas and Paula Rego, separated by time but united by their subject, use the motif of dance to reveal truths about their subjects that linger with viewers long after they've laid eyes on their works. Edgar Degas was born in 1834 in Paris, France, into a wealthy and privileged family. Though he showed a passion for art from a young age, much of his early development was self-taught, and he did not receive formal training until his 20s. Initially following his father's wishes, Degas enrolled in the University of Paris to study law, leaving after only a year when he was admitted to the École des Beaux-Arts. There he studied classical techniques under the artist Louis Lamotte. He then spent the next 3 years in Italy, honing his skills in classical art by imitating the works of Renaissance masters like Michelangelo, Raphael, and Titian. When he returned to Paris, he focused on painting historical depictions and found some success with these works in the Paris Salon. But his artistic vision started to shift when he met Edward Manet in 1864. The two artists met while replicating works at the Louvre, and Manet's influence on the contemporary subject matter and techniques helped guide Degas towards new artistic ideas. The Franco-Prussian War in 1870 temporarily interrupted Degas' career as he enlisted in the National Guard to defend Paris. During rifle training, it was discovered that his eyesight was defective, a problem that affected his ability to paint during his later years. After the war, Degas traveled to New Orleans, Louisiana to visit family and took the opportunity to focus on portrait painting. By the time he returned to Paris 6 months later, he had become increasingly frustrated with the conservative policies of the Paris Salon. So he aligned himself with a group of young, forward-thinking artists working to create independent exhibitions. These became known as the Impressionist exhibitions, running from 1874 to 1886. Despite his involvement and him taking the lead on organizing these exhibitions, he rejected the Impressionist label, even though he shared in their subject matter of those on the fringes of society. Yet, he always favored the traditional elements from his academic background. This led to disagreements within the group and contributed to its eventual dissolution. The artists scattered, each carrying the weight of their own ambitions, and Degas remained, as ever, the restless seeker on his own. Paula Rego was born in 1935 in Lisbon, Portugal, to a middle-class family. She is known for her hauntingly raw depictions of human relationships, femininity, and sociopolitical dynamics. She began drawing at the age of 4 when she was in the care of her grandmother, who told her traditional Portuguese folk tales. Her upbringing was marked by a duality. She grew up under the authoritarian rule of Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, where censorship and nationalist Catholic values were rigidly enforced. Her home, however, was a liberal refuge from the political climate. Her father, José Figueira Rego, an engineer and progressive thinker, stood as an outspoken critic, and in doing so, exposed Rego early onto political dissent. At 17, she enrolled in the Slade School of Fine Art in London, where she met her husband, Victor Willing, a British artist with whom she had 3 children. Her early work was rooted in abstract expressionism, but over time, it evolved into a highly representational style. She was particularly fond of the works by the Spanish painter Joan Miró and his automatic drawing technique, developed by the Surrealists to let the hand move freely across the paper, suppressing conscious control and allowing the unconscious mind to direct the art. As an adult, Rego used her canvas to explore themes related to women's oppression, particularly focusing on issues like abortion, female sexuality, and gender roles. Her 1998-1999 series, The Abortion Pastels, documented the harrowing experiences of women undergoing illegal abortions in Portugal. This series was credited with helping to shift public opinion. Similarly, her Dog Women series from the 1990s showcases women in animalistic poses, subverting societal expectations forced upon them to be pristine and quiet. Edgar Degas was an observer of the human form. He spent much of his life portraying ballerinas who made up over half of his artistic output. The dance class, painted in 1874, depicts a group of young ballet dancers in a rehearsal studio. Degas places us right in the middle of the scene, surrounded by the soft rustle of tulle and the shuffles and thumps of the dancers' feet moving across the wooden floor. Our subjects are mid-rehearsal, not at their glamorous best, but caught in those in-between moments, waiting, preparing, and practicing. Many have downcast eyes and their postures imply fatigue. This highlights the tension between the beauty of dance and the physical effort it requires. The figure at the center in particular, caught mid-movement with her arms extended, is a symbol of ballet's fleeting grace, a moment that's there and gone in an instant. Watching her is the ballet master, Jules Perrault, who was a well-known choreographer and instructor at the time. He is the grounding figure in the composition, rooting the swirling activity of the dancers in the reality of disciplined instruction. With his heavy posture leaning on the cane, his presence suggests a weightiness that counters the light movements of the dancers. The light, cool greens of the walls, bathed in daylight from an unseen window, creates a break for the eyes, but also hints at the intimate size of the room. The mirror hung on the wall, however, helps to open up the space, making it appear larger than it is. The reflection is less about the visual accuracy and more about presenting us with a second reality, a world within a world. It asks us to consider how performance is both observed and internalized. This is a beautifully skilled painting by Degas, though beneath the attractive surface, there's a feeling of discomfort, a grit beneath the satin. While the ballerinas appear graceful, they are workers, young women often from modest backgrounds subjected to the pressures of discipline, physical strain, and the gaze of wealthy patrons. This was a world in which ballet was not only an art form, but also a means of social mobility. These dancers, known as petits rats or little rats, were underpaid and sometimes financially supported, or rather exploited, by the wealthy male abonnés or subscribers who frequented the opera house. And Degas painted these scenes with an almost clinical detachment, a cold eye that exposed the laborious reality of dance. Girls rehearsing endlessly, their bodies bent and tense, and often watched over by the looming figures of older men, even if not seen in the canvas. Paula Rego's The Dance was created in 1988, a century after Degas' painting. The scene takes place in an open landscape at night, a juxtaposition against Degas' confined institutional ballet studio. The figures we see are not adolescents rehearsing for a performance, but a community dancing outdoors. At first glance, it is a seemingly tranquil painting of a communal dance, one that takes place on a moonlit coast. but at its core, it reflects Rego's exploration of themes like loss, grief, and memory. The large format, Rego's largest at the time, measuring at 212 by 274 centimeters, pulls us in, demanding both physical and emotional engagement. It has a dreamlike quality that she's drawn from the Portuguese folklore of her grandmother's stories. The composition features 8 figures, a woman on the left, 2 couples, and 2 women and a girl dancing together. The woman on the left, hands open, is Rego, depicted with solidity and strength. In a poignant doubling, she appears again in the center, dancing with her husband Victor. She began painting this piece during a time when her husband was in the final stages of multiple sclerosis, a degenerative illness that leads to loss of motor function and eventual death. He passed away before the painting could be completed, and so the dance between them is more than a physical act. It's a slow aching metaphor for his departure, a reluctant motion of letting go, while life continues on its circular path. On the far right, we see a pregnant couple. Here, Rego renders the woman's pregnancy not as a sentimental spectacle, but as a grounded physical reality, making their dance a meditation of sorts on the endurance and quiet strength required to carry new life. This sentiment is continued here. These 3 figures are a symbol of the different stages of womanhood, childhood, adulthood, and old age, shown in their varying postures. They embody life's transitions, holding one another's hand through a communal act that is at once celebratory and mournful. She transforms personal sorrow into a broader narrative of girlhood and resilience. The sky is a deep, heavy blue, and the shadows cast by the moon only deepen the emotions that lie here. Rego's work is not observational from a distance, but fully immersed in the narrative that she creates. Both artists, though separated by time, explored the notion of performance. Where Degas focuses on the discipline and rigor of dancers preparing for a public spectacle, Rego's dancers are engaged in a more private, introspective performance. The institutional versus the natural, the observer versus the participant, and the detached versus the intimate. The medium of dance serves as a metaphor for the human condition, capturing the tension, the physicality of movement, and the emotional landscapes that underlie it. Sonia and Robert Delaunay were a pioneering couple in the modernist movement. Rather than framing Sonia as the partner or parallel to Robert, or vice versa, it's more accurate to say that they shared a mutual obsession with color's capacity to transform not just art, but the experience of seeing itself. Together with František Kupka, they co-founded the Orphism or Simultaneous movement, a branch of Cubism that focused more on abstraction as well as bright colors that was inspired by Fauvism. Robert Delaunay was born in Paris in 1885 to an aristocratic family. His passion for painting was evident from a young age, although his early artistic training was somewhat unconventional. Rather than attending formal art academies, he was largely self-taught until the age of 17, when his uncle arranged for him to apprentice for a theatrical set-building firm. This experience exposed him to the technical side of large-scale visual work, which would later influence the grandiosity of his compositions. He soon met Henri Rousseau, who encouraged him to pursue a career in art, and it wasn't long before Delaunay became a fixture in the Parisian art circles. He was inspired by the works of Paul Cézanne and Jean Metzinger, and began to learn more about Michel-Eugène Chevreul's theory on color. In Chevreul's book, The Principles of Harmony and Contrast of Colors, he said, in the case where the eyes see at the same time 2 contiguous colors, they will appear as dissimilar as possible, both in their optical composition and in the height of their tone. This new understanding of color led Delaunay to adopt a neo-impressionist style, using shorter adjacent brushstrokes and primary colors. In 1906, Delaunay left Paris to fulfill his military service in Laon, France. Although his time in the military interrupted his artistic progress, it also gave him time to reflect on his developing style. When he returned to Paris a year later, he found himself in the middle of the Cubist movement that further added kindling to the fire of his inspirations. Rather than fully embracing Cubism, however, he used all that he's been exposed to and crafted his own unique style that would later be known as Orphism. Sonia Delaunay, born Sarah Elievna Stern in 1885 in Odessa, Ukraine, was the youngest daughter of poor Jewish parents. After being orphaned at the age of 5, she moved to St. Petersburg to live with her wealthy uncle, Henry Turk, and took his surname and changed her first name. At 18, she began studying at the Academy of Fine Arts in Karlsruhe, Germany, but within a few years decided to move to Paris, where she spent the rest of her life. Shortly before leaving Russia, she wrote in her diary, "I have already decided that as soon as possible, I will settle in Paris or London. Life is broader and happier there." During her youth in Paris, her works were portraits that were inspired by Gauguin. This early fascination with color would stay with her for the rest of her 7-decade career. In 1909, at the age of 24, she met Robert Delaunay and they quickly fell in love and married. She described him as a poet who wrote not with words, but with colors. Their partnership also became an artistic alliance, forging a bond over both of their interests in Neo-Impressionism and Cubism, developing the aforementioned Orphism movement. She had a willingness to move fluidly between fine art and applied art. Using pieces of brightly colored paper and fabric, she created quilts, curtains, and lampshades for her home, as well as simultaneous dresses that she herself wore around Paris. In extending abstraction to other mediums, she was tearing down the boundary between fine art and design, a move that would later be seen as revolutionary within the context of the history of modernism. Robert Delaunay's Simultaneous Windows, second motif from 1912, shows us his fascination with the interplay of light and color. It is part of his Window series, a group of 22 paintings created between April and December of 1912, where he rejected the traditional function of a painting being a window into a scene and instead turned the focus outwards on the process of seeing. Here, he depicted the view into the ambulatory of the Gothic church Saint-Séverin in Paris. The fragmented composition is designed to slow the viewer's gaze, highlighting how visual perception differs from what the eye actually sees. He wanted to show that perception also relies on prior knowledge. Let's look closer here. Do you see anything familiar? This is the Eiffel Tower, still recognizable even when obscured within the abstraction. Knowing a bit more about the scene now, let's look at the choice of colors. The yellows and oranges suggest a warm sunlight, and the various shades of blue here are the sky. By placing contrasting colors next to each other, such as blues and oranges, or purples and yellows, he creates a sense of depth and space. The central theme here is the light and the interaction of colors, which guided Delaunay in his move further into abstraction. As he himself said, "The windows truly began my life as an artist." Sonia Delaunay's Prisimes Électriques from 1914 shares a similar foundation in color theory, yet her approach is more expansive. The title references the prisms of light generated by electricity, a new and transformative force in early 20th century life. Here she captured her first experience of electric streetlights on a Paris boulevard. The glowing lamps are transformed into radiant discs of color that flood the canvas, yet traces of solid forms still remain. She uses the primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, paired with their complementary colors to create a balanced sense of harmony. At the center, she creates a subtle tension between the contrast of red and violet, a deliberate choice to draw our gaze and provide a starting point for closer inspection. As we look around the painting, we may notice spirals leading us back to the center, revealing that amidst the initial chaos, there's a sense of direction, a line through the flat expanse of colors. Each element affects and is affected by those around it, and the result of this interaction is what we see. On the left, there's a 4-tiered kiosk filled with books with names on the covers, including that of poet Blaise Cendrars. This highlights the active collaboration between the artistic communities, painters and writers, that was alive at the time. In the lower half of the painting, shadowy figures emerge faintly, nearly dissolving into the vibrant glow of the electric light. This blend of abstraction and subtle realism speaks to Sonia's mastery of color and form. These two artists were not mirrors of one another, but collaborators. They were respectively accomplished. Robert exhibited his works in galleries across France and Italy, and Sonia made history in 1964 as the first living female artist to have a retrospective at the Louvre. Together, their works form a conversation, with Sonia offering a fuller integration of art into the lived world, while Robert pursued its conceptual possibilities. The early 20th century was a time of rapid transformation in art, as avant-garde movements in Europe began to question and defy traditional approaches to painting, sculpture, and design. Among the leading figures of this artistic revolution were Pablo Picasso and Liubov Popova, two artists who contributed significantly to the development and evolution of the Cubist movement. Born in Malaga, Spain in 1881, Pablo Picasso was a child prodigy whose father, José Ruiz Blasco, an art instructor, recognized his son's talent early and ensured he received formal training at the young age of 7. His family spent the next few years moving to La Coruña and then Barcelona, where his father worked as a professor at the School of Fine Arts in both cities. Ruiz even convinced the school officials to allow Picasso, then about 14, to take the entrance examination there for an advanced class, which he passed, becoming one of the youngest students ever admitted. His early canvases were plump with academic polish, ones that the young Picasso could produce in his sleep. At 16, Picasso was sent to the Royal Academy of Fine Arts of San Fernando in Madrid, Spain's leading art institution. But he found the academic style restrictive and spent more time sketching scenes of city life and studying works by Francisco Goya and El Greco at the Prado Museum. In the subsequent years, he moved between France and Spain, producing works that would come to define his Blue Period. Inspired by his own struggles and the hardships of those around him, Picasso's work during this time was dominated by shades of blue and focused on themes of poverty, isolation, and sadness. He eventually transitioned to his Rose Period, characterized by warmer hues of pink and orange, and subjects drawn from circus life and the theater, reflecting his regained sense of playfulness and romanticism. In 1907, during a retrospective for Paul Cézanne held a year after his death, Picasso was motivated to change course again. From Cézanne, he learned to distill the essence of nature into cohesive, structured compositions that express an artist's unique perspective. And at the same time as this revelation, the aesthetics of traditional African sculpture were becoming a subject for European artists to draw inspiration from. For Picasso, this sparked the development of his next era, Cubism. Co-founded with Georges Braque, Cubism challenged the conventional techniques of linear perspective that had prevailed for 4 centuries, since the Renaissance. Picasso and Braque deconstructed objects into geometric shapes, presenting multiple viewpoints at once, merging influences from African, Iberian, and Oceanic art with a focus on radical abstraction. Realism was no longer the primary goal. Instead, art became a complex dialogue of form, structure, and space. Picasso had a career that spanned over 78 years, during which he produced more than 20,000 works. He did not simply ride the wave of modernism. He was its roaring leader in many ways. While Picasso was revolutionizing Western European art, Liubov Popova was making her mark in Russia, where she became a key figure in the avant-garde movement that accompanied the Russian Revolution. Born in 1889 into a wealthy family, Popova's early private art education in Moscow and her travels provided her with exposure to the European art scene. She encountered the fractured planes of Cubism in France and the rhythmic energy of Futurism in Italy, combining these influences to become one of the early female innovators in Cubo-Futurism, a hybrid movement of the two. Her paintings in this style were visual commentaries on the technological and social shifts of the time, but she wasn't one to stagnate. During the next few years, her work slowly began to lean more and more towards abstraction. She joined the supremacist group in Russia, led by the father of suprematism, Kazimir Malevich. This movement focused on basic geometric forms and limited color palette, and abandoned all references to representational paintings. During this time, she created what she called painterly architectonics, a series of highly abstract paintings where she explored an increasingly minimalist approach to composition and a focus on the spatial tension between intersecting planes. But soon came the 1917 Russian Revolution, and with it, the birth of a new artistic ideal. Art that was for everyone, not just for the well-to-do or for the sake of beauty alone. This new movement, constructivism, was not an isolated aesthetic preference, but an ideological shift to align art with the needs of a rapidly transforming society, more practical and socially conscious. Popova saw herself as one of the engineers of a new society of this early Soviet state. She wanted to build a new world where art was not an isolated bourgeoisie activity, but a means of contributing to the collective welfare. Picasso's Three Musicians, painted in 1921, is a key work within his synthetic Cubist period, characterized by a move away from the fragmented perspective of analytical Cubism and towards constructing recognizable forms through collage-like elements. Picasso painted two large versions of this piece the same year, both being group portraits of him and two of his friends, the poets Guillaume Apollinaire and Max Jacob. Apollinaire had passed away 3 years prior, and Jacob had entered a monastery the year the painting was created. And so this painting can be interpreted as Picasso's tribute to this friendship, now changed by time and loss. In the center, we see Picasso as the Harlequin, playing a guitar, dressed in a bright diamond-patterned suit, with a blue mask obscuring part of his face and his companion's body. To the left, Apollinaire appears as Pierrot, dressed in blue and white, with a pointed hat and a black mask, playing a clarinet. Both the Harlequin and Pierrot are characters from the traditional Italian theater Commedia dell'arte. Picasso repeatedly depicted these characters throughout his career, and he personally identified with the trickster, Harlequin. On the right, Jacob is depicted as a monk, with his black robe, his fibrous beard, and sheet music in front of him. He contrasts sharply with the brighter figures around him, yet also serves as a respite for the eyes. Now that we're more familiar with the elements in the composition, what sticks out to you? Perhaps it's the Harlequin's brown hand placed on a small white square here. This represents Picasso's control over the collage technique and literally symbolizes his creative hand. Hidden within this busy scene is a dark brown dog beneath the table. Its presence is subtle. A tail flicks between Harlequin's legs, and its fragmented body appears between the Pierrots and the table legs, with its shadow cast on the back wall. The setting, a bare, boxy brown space, presents a challenge in its simplicity. The figures feel pressed against this shallow two-dimensional space, yet the interlocking forms create depth through color and geometry rather than traditional perspective. Picasso's approach here, much like a jigsaw puzzle, asks the viewer to piece the scene together. Liubov Popova's The Pianist was created 7 years earlier and engages with the same Cubist principles of fragmentation and reconstruction. While Cubism in Paris focused on form, Popova and her Russian contemporaries concentrated on movement and dynamism. Here, the pianist is in the midst of playing, but it's hard to make them out at first glance. Popova fractures the figure into jagged angular shards, giving the impression that the music is physically tearing the performer and the piano apart. Each shape collides with the next. the diagonal lines pulling our eyes across the surface in a dizzying way. You can almost hear the chaotic piano notes and see the rapid-fire movement of fingers over keys. The color palette is largely made up of whites, blacks, and grays, shaded in a way that creates a sense of depth and spatial distortion. There's a pop of color here at the bottom right with the red of the pianist's hand and the browns of the piano. The overall restrained hues ensures that our eye is drawn from one sharp angular shape to another, almost mimicking the sensation of following the notes of a melody or the motion of a pianist's finger across the keyboard. Despite the high level of abstraction, Popova creates a palpable sense of energy, as if the music itself were shaping the forms in the painting. Looking at these masterpieces, we see two entirely different approaches to capturing the energy of performance. Picasso's musicians are caught in a moment of static harmony, while Popova's pianist is in the middle of an energetic crescendo, barely contained within the frame. The differences that we see between these two works do not only result from the individual artist's choices, but also reflect the cultural and historical contexts within which they were creating. Picasso, working in Paris during a period of relative stability, focused on the formal elements of painting. Popova, however, was working in the turmoil of pre-revolutionary Russia, where the definition around art was changing. And so her work pushes cubism to its limits, where abstraction becomes a tool for communicating the frenetic pace of modern life. If you like Picasso, you'll not only like Popova, you'll gain a deeper appreciation for how Cubism evolved beyond Paris, how it became a global movement that spoke to the concerns of a rapidly changing world. Look at this painting, a woodblock print of 3 women in 18th century Edo. Now let's turn our attention here, a painting of 5 women draped in crimson fabrics. Are you able to tell that they were made over 148 years apart? That between the creation of the former and the latter, Japan experienced its isolationist Edo period, the fall of the shogunate, the Meiji Restoration, and countless wars and natural disasters. And yet, they feel similar. They share a common heartbeat, the resilience of Japanese art and Japanese women. Kitagawa Utamaro was an enigmatic artist. His early life and origins are largely undocumented, leaving scholars with few certainties. Records of him began appearing in the 1770s, when his works, specifically his portraits of beauties with exaggerated elongated features, such as this one, began to circulate. Over the course of his career, he created more than 2,000 known prints, and unlike many of his peers, whose reputations blossomed posthumously, Utamaro was the rare exception that received widespread fame across Japan while he was still alive. He was a master of ukiyo-e woodblock prints, a popular art form in Japan during the Edo period that involved creating images by carving designs onto woodblocks, inking them, and pressing them onto paper. He expanded the boundaries of bijinga genre, a specific type of ukiyo-e print that focuses on portraits of beautiful women. In contrast to his contemporaries like hokusai, who were celebrated for their depictions of landscapes and the supernatural, Utamaro excelled at humanizing his subjects. The tilt of a head, the flutter of a kimono sleeve, facial expressions caught between action and stillness. They contributed to a nuanced look at femininity that felt both aspirational, showing culturally idealized beauty standards, and grounded, capturing the subtle gestures of real humans. His images, designed for mass production, at once reflect and reinforce the commodification of female beauty in Edo society, offering a complex and at times disquieting intersection of artistry and consumption. Fuku Akino was born in 1908 in Iwata-gun, Shizuoka, Japan. Her artistic education began humbly, learning Western painting techniques, specifically those of Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin, from an elementary school art teacher. Her formative years as an artist were spent entirely within Japan. In 1927, Akino's commitment to painting led her to study under Rinkyu Ishii, a Nihonga-style painter associated with the government salon-style exhibitions that promoted traditional Japanese aesthetics. Nihonga, developed during the Meiji period, and simply translating to Japanese paintings, was a conscious attempt to uphold Japanese artistic values in the face of growing Western influence, using materials like ink, mineral pigments, and washi paper. 2 years later, in 1929, Akino furthered her training under Suisho Nishiyama, another prominent Nihonga figure. These two teachers were deeply embedded in the artistic establishment, and Akino's training under them signaled her formal entry into a tradition that balanced both preservation and adaptation of Japanese artistic techniques. And with the present geopolitical turbulence of the 1930s and 1940s, there were limited opportunities for international travel. During her later adulthood years, however, she was invited to be a visiting professor at India's Vishva Bharati University. Her tenure there exposed her to India's vibrant culture, which for her was a revelation of color and spirituality. This opened her eyes to the beauties of other cultures, and from the 1960s onwards, she would regularly leave Japan to explore other parts of Asia. She painted un-Japanese compositions and elements with a Nihonga style and material. Her art, while not overtly political, reflects this search for meaning in a post-war, globalized world where the old definitions of nationality and identity were being redefined. Her pieces often depicted women, and through her nuanced gaze, they became symbols of resilience and transformation, embodying the subtle yet profound changes occurring within and beyond Japan. Three Beauties of the Present Day is one of Utamaro's most iconic works, often celebrated for its graceful simplicity and elegance. At first glance, the piece seems to reflect the standard beauty conventions of the Edo period. Three women, nearly identical in appearance, their faces softly painted in the same elongated, delicate style, but they were real people and famous beauties of their time. The geisha Tomimoto Toyohina and tea house waitresses Naniwaya Okita and Takashima Hisa. Now let's look closer. Each woman's face is rendered with slight variations in the shape of the eyes, mouth, and hairline. Within the confines of rather rigid beauty standards, Utamaro manages to slip in these nuances, showing us that these women, while conforming to an ideal, are still individuals. The triangular formation of their heads create an internal geometry, subtly guiding the eye from one woman to the next, as though each beauty was a part of a harmonious whole. They wear elaborately patterned kimonos, and their hair, drawn with the simplest of lines, looks sculpted. The fine detail work of their hair contrasts with the smoothness of their faces devoid of excess expression, almost mask-like in their perfection. Utamaro's focus on their dress, hair, and posture reflects the commodification of beauty in Edo's pleasure districts. In these spaces, women were not simply admired for their physical appearance, they were celebrated for their ability to perform beauty, to embody the grace and refinement that defined the era's aesthetics. Each subject's family crest, a Japanese primrose, a paulownia, and daimyo oak, is painted with them as markers of their identities and social standing. The background of the painting is bare, but actually has a glittering effect. It was dusted with muscovite, a variety of the natural stone mica, which contributes to the overall elegance of the piece without overwhelming it. In this piece, Utamaro has captured the grace of these women without overloading the scene. His pieces don't need to shout, and his subjects hold a quiet grace that speak for themselves. Fuku Akino's Red Clothes from 1938 is an elegant painting that explores a tension between tradition and modernity. It echoes both classical Nihonga aesthetics and a modern sense of space and arrangement. We see 5 women seated around a table, each dressed in variations of red kimonos, a color symbolizing vitality and passion in Japanese culture. The plain background, barely more than a soft gray, ensures that our focus remains on the women themselves. Though all the figures are dressed in red, no 2 kimonos are the same. Some feature checks or stripes, others floral patterns. Each design is unique, yet unified by the shared palette. They are gathered around a small floral table holding a blue vase with 2 carnations. This is the calm focal point, a place to return to as our gaze moves from woman to woman. The black angular lines of the chairs contrast with the soft rounded figures of the women. This interplay between rigid and organic shapes brings a visual rhythm, almost as if these women are caught in a still life. The soft textiles of their kimonos and the flattened spatial arrangement are inspired by traditional ukiyo-e prints. At the same time, the hard lacquered furniture and the modern postures of the women, reminiscent of post-impressionism, have been influenced by Western art. It's a cultural dialogue between the old and the new. Their positions suggest community, but there's no interaction between them. Each woman appears absorbed in her own world, introspective and distant, yet almost melancholic. Given the timing of this painting, perhaps Akino was exploring the notions of isolation or the weight of social expectations in early 20th century Japan, where traditional roles of women were being slowly redefined, yet still constrained by societal norms. In this painting, the past and the present sit uneasily together, just as these women do, beautiful yet distanced, quietly existing in a moment of suspended time. Women's interior lives is a subject that is often glossed over, both in Eastern and Western art. So to see that here in the spotlight feels both timeless and deeply personal. These 2 pieces are direct products of their time and show us each artist's role in their society. Through the constant that is their subject of choice, we trace not only the evolution of Japanese art techniques, but also the shifting portrayal of women in Japanese life. Surrealism, perhaps more than any other movement in 20th century art, invites us to probe the boundaries between the real and the imaginary. This movement emerged in the early 1920s in the aftermath of World War I, with a goal to challenge rational thought and delve into the unconscious mind. Among its practitioners were Salvador Dalí and Leonora Carrington. Dalí was a man who turned his psyche into a parade of the peculiar, and his canvases into theaters for the bizarre. He had the obsessive precision of a man who needed to prove that the subconscious mind is in fact its own world, a waking nightmare made palpably vivid. Carrington's work, on the other hand, are less demonstrations and more invitations. You step into her paintings as if you were stepping into an alternate universe of her making. There's a warmth, almost a humor in her pieces, but that doesn't make it any less strange or hauntingly beautiful. She does not flaunt the strangeness of the subconscious. She's letting us catch a glimpse of it organically, like a flash of something caught out of the corner of her eye. Salvador Dalí was born in 1904 in Catalonia, Spain. His 3-year-old brother, also named Salvador, had passed away 9 months prior to Dalí being born. This loss haunted Dalí throughout his life, and he mythologized it in his writings and art. He once said, "We resembled each other like 2 drops of water, but we had different reflections. He was probably the first version of myself, but conceived too much in the absolute." This sense of living as a replacement may have contributed to Dalí's heightened sense of self and the surreal nature of his works. At age 12, he attended a municipal drawing school where he displayed early artistic talent. 1 year later, his father proudly held an exhibition of his son's works in their home. At 18, Dalí moved to Madrid to study at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts of San Fernando. This was where his eccentric persona began to take shape. He dressed more flamboyantly and acted with an aristocratic detachment that would become a key part of his public image. But his schooling was interrupted twice when he was expelled. First, for leading a student protest when the painter Daniel Vasquez Diaz was denied a teaching post, and later for declaring that none of his teachers were qualified to judge his work. He left Madrid with his sights on Paris, the center of the art world at the time. There he joined the Surrealist movement and met his future wife and lifelong muse, Gala Eluard. The Surrealist circle welcomed him at first, but his antics and political flirtation with fascism eventually resulted in his ejection. Undeterred, he declared, "I am surrealism," showing his view of himself as inseparable from the movement. So where does that leave us? On the one hand, he was unquestionably a genius, a technical master who could bend the rules of art at will. On the other, a man that was a relentless self-promoter that crafted an eccentric public persona, complete with his iconic curled mustache and a penchant for outlandish statements.
My personality is 1,000 times much more important than my painting.
His career, which spanned 6 decades, often blurred the lines between artist and performer. But maybe that tension is exactly the point. Dalí's work holds its contradictions as tightly as he held his audience's gaze. There's a reason we keep coming back to him despite the noise and the flash. He once said, "I don't do drugs, I am drugs." And that's the truth of it. To look at a Dalí is to enter into a narcotic haze where reality and hallucinations melt together. It's thrilling, it's maddening, and it's impossible to forget. Leonora Carrington was born into an affluent Irish Catholic family in Lancashire, England in 1917. From a young age, she rebelled against the expectations placed on her. Her family wanted her to become a debutante and follow a traditional path, but she had other ambitions and found refuge in art. In 1936, she enrolled in the newly established London branch of the Amédée aux Enfants Art Academy as one of its first students. Of her time there, she recalled that she was given a single apple, a sheet of paper, and a hard pencil, and was told to draw the apple with a single continuous line repeated for 6 months. This method was designed to instill discipline and precision in the young artists, and echoed the studio practices of Renaissance masters. A year later, she met Max Ernst, a German artist who was well established in the Surrealist and Dada movements. Ernst was 26 years her senior, but their relationship quickly grew romantic. Together, they moved to the south of France, where they collaborated and inspired each other's work. The Surrealist movement, in which they both practiced, however, saw female artists as femme enfant, or woman child, who only served to be the muse. But as Carrington once said, "I didn't have time to be anyone's muse. I was too busy rebelling against my family and learning to be an artist." In 1940, when the Nazis took control of France during World War II, Carrington fled to Spain. The weight of the war, the loss of her home, and the imprisonment of Ernst led her to her emotional breakdown, and her parents had her institutionalized at a psychiatric hospital where she suffered even more pain by the way of drug-induced shock therapy. She was eventually released after her cousin, who was a doctor, intervened. She was placed in the care of a nurse but managed to escape during a transfer to Lisbon and made her way to Mexico. In her memoir, Down Below, she vividly recounts the horrors of her breakdown, the physical suffering of her confinement, and the sexual abuse she endured at the hands of her caregivers. And in a grotesque reflection of the era's attitude towards women's mental health, these assaults were dismissed as being unreliable due to her state of mind. The tragedy deepens when we consider that Carrington's voice, which was just beginning to assert itself in the Surrealist movement, was brutally silenced during this time. Yet her experiences fueled her later work. Her art became the outlet she used to discover the unknown, transformation, and exploration of the psyche that holds our trauma. These two pieces are quintessential works within the Surrealist movement. Dalí's The Persistence of Memory is perhaps one of his most famous works, known for its melting clocks in a desert-like landscape. It's interesting to note that despite the vastness the scene suggests, the piece itself is actually quite small, measuring at only 24 by 33 centimeters. The size creates an intimate viewing experience, fitting the psychological nature of the content. In the painting, time, which we normally perceive as constant and rigid, becomes distorted and fragile. The otherwise unyielding timekeepers are flexible here, drooping and sagging like tired flesh. Time hasn't just stopped, it's exhausted, melting away under the heat of the sun. Dalí's native Catalonia inspired the rocky cliffs in the background, grounding this otherworldly scene in a real place. The ants crawling over the orange stopwatch are a recurring symbol in Dalí's work, often representing decay, a reminder that nothing, not even the surreal world, escapes the effects of time. The most peculiar element of this piece is the amorphous fleshy object sprawled in the foreground. It resembles a distorted face, a tongue coming out of the nose, and eyelashes protruding from one side like the legs of an insect. This is often interpreted as a representation of Dalí himself, seen in a profile view. His body and unconscious mind have collapsed into the landscape. The self is reduced to a limp, sleeping mass as time unravels around it. The year before this painting was done, Dalí developed his paranoid critical method, a strategy of self-induced hallucinations to go deeper into his subconscious. But this was not madness. It was an artistic method that some called madness, a conscious flirtation with the irrational. And rather than being lost in the chaos of his delusions, Dalí wielded it as a precise instrument of invention. As he famously quipped, "The difference between a madman and me is that I am not mad." His technical skill is evident in the way he controls every detail. His brushwork is tight, his colors are clear, and every element feels thought out. But for all its sharpness, there's an unnerving quiet that implies we have no power to impose any order here. Our memory distorts, time slips away, and the landscape of our minds are both a sanctuary and a labyrinth, where chaos lurks beneath the surface of even our most ordered thoughts. Now let's look at Leonora Carrington's The Lovers, which shows a different kind of dream. The scene feels like a glimpse into something private, an intimate exchange, or perhaps a ritual. The backdrop, a golden tent, drapes the scene in an earthly warmth, yet it conceals more than it reveals. Through the small but deliberate opening, we see the night sky, punctuated by one star that shines brighter than the rest. Below it, there are mountains and the silhouette of a camel, a beast that walks through dreamscapes as easily as it might traverse the deserts of reality. At the center lies a bed, an altar of some sorts, where two androgynous figures with elongated heads with conical red and blue helmets are covered by a blanket. They are turned towards one another in what is a moment of tenderness or confrontation. Surrounding these figures are 8 hooded individuals, all dressed in white robes and black hoods, with crosses hanging around their necks. Their faces are obscured, giving them a ritualistic anonymity, existing merely to serve a larger ceremony. They stand witness, but remain detached. Their hooded presence helps to draw the eye back to the central pair again and again. We have stumbled upon a ritual, and everyone else already knows their part in it. In the foreground, Carrington has painted 5 hybrid animals. There's something both familiar and eerie in their forms, a mix of the mundane and the fantastical. The most intriguing animal is a wolf-like creature hunched on 2 walking sticks, wearing a red boot contrasting its dark shaggy fur. It's comical and unsettling at once. The most human of the creatures, this figure's position at the edge suggests a caretaker, perhaps a shaman who straddles the worlds of human and animal. One of the robed figures stands nearby, holding a purple cloth that cascades to the ground. Its purpose unclear, but this shade of purple is a regal one, long connected with royalty, power, and the sacred in various traditions. The title of the piece, The Lovers, provides us with more context on the scene. It suggests intimacy, but Carrington's handling of it is anything but straightforward. Are we seeing lovers in a romantic embrace, or witnessing a transformation, perhaps a merging of 2 opposite forces? The red and blue coloring could be dualities, fire and water, life and death, masculine and feminine, all eternally linked yet distinct. The talents of both of these surrealist artists draw us into landscapes that defy the logical. Dalí, with his fascination with Freudian psychoanalysis, often approached the subconscious with an eye toward the irrational anxieties and impulses that lurk beneath everyday life. His works are filled with tension, and at times have a clinical quality to them that makes the dream more of a dissection. Carrington, however, embraces a sense of freedom and magic despite her lived experiences. The creatures and settings she paints feel like characters in an ongoing story that will unfold whether we're watching or not. Her subconscious was not only a place of discomfort, but also one of empowerment, transformation, and connection with broader cosmic order. Yet both artists extended an invitation to explore, to enter a space where reason ceases to be the compass. The history of art is not etched in stone. It's a living, breathing narrative shaped as much by what we choose to see as what we overlook. Acknowledging the contributions of women artists alongside their male counterparts does not only correct a historical imbalance, it deepens our entire understanding of the creative landscape. Art becomes not just a record of individual genius, but a more inclusive, layered reflection of the human experience, one that evolves with each perspective we add. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to see more videos like this, consider subscribing. And if you have any thoughts or suggestions about this video or recommendations for future ones, drop a comment below. See you next time!